Okay, here we go. We are going to talk about muscle metabolism, energy, and ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So let's look at what that molecule looks like, right? Adenosine is this part of the molecule here, and then the phosphate bonds are what makes it adenosine triphosphate. 1, 2, 3. We have 3 phosphate bonds. So this is going to be our energy molecule. So what does it do? Energy for contraction and ATP. ATP supplies the energy needed for the muscle fiber to, right, move and detach the cross bridges. It's involved with the calcium pumping into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and it's also responsible for pumping the sodium out of a cell and the calcium back into the cell after the excitation contraction coupling. So we need ATP for all of this. Is there anything else that is of importance here? Just that now what we are going to look at exactly how those bonds or energy is made. So what do we have available as a resource in the muscle ready to go? We have a little bit of this ready to go. We don't have to make it, it's already there. It'll give us about 4 to 6 seconds of muscle contraction stimulation. So at rest, we already have energy for 4 to 6 seconds of muscle contraction. Then we're gonna need to make more ATP. It's the only source of energy for contraction, so we have to make it fast. So we call it regenerated. It has to be regenerated quickly. I like to think of it as made or generated, but regenerated is because it's kind of cycling through over and over again and again to help us. So it happens in 3 ways. Direct phosphorylation, okay, and that's what we looked at already of ADP, adenosine diphosphate by creatine phosphate. So creatine phosphate's located in the cell already. We'll talk in detail after I list all these. Number 2 is the anaerobic pathway. So without oxygen, we have glycolysis and lactic acid formation that in this anaerobic pathway, we generate ATP, just a little bit. The most ATP is generated through the 3rd way, which is the anaerobic pathway. So now let's look at each of these. All right, so what is creatine phosphate? It's already there. It's the molecule that is going to donate one phosphate molecule to form ATP. So it happens fast. It's already present, boom, it's right by it. The ADP is hanging out. It's, the configuration with the electron, with the charge, right, is going to attract it and generate that ATP quickly. There's an enzyme that carries out this transfer. So this is the creatine kinase. Without the creatine kinase, without the enzyme, the phosphate wouldn't go over to bond with the ADP. So this gives us power for about 15 seconds. So it's just generating a little bit of energy. But 15 seconds is good. You can get some work done in 15 seconds. So again, we have the creatine phosphate with the ADP. And that with the enzymic reaction, right, the creatine kinase allowing the phosphate molecule to break bonds with the creatine and go over to the ADP, we get our ATP. This is just the same thing, but smaller. So we have adenosine diphosphate meeting with creatine phosphate and the enzyme creatine kinase leading to ATP. So how much and how fast? We get 1 ATP per molecule of creatine. So this is enough for, again, 10 to 15 seconds. It's about 100 contractions. It's about a 100-yard dash. So, so we'll draw upon this after it's almost simultaneous as the same time of the reserve, but the reserve energy is already there. So that's activated. There's a brief time when this needs to, when that actual changing of bonds has to happen to generate the ATP. So we have energy available, and now we have, boom, really fast, the next energy available, just a little bit more to get us on our dash way. But we're gonna need more. So we use glycolysis, and this just takes a little bit longer because there's, you have to break down the glycogen molecule in order to transfer the energy and then use it in the muscle. So first step is glucose breakdown. It doesn't require oxygen to do this. And you get two molecules of pyruvic acid. You also get two molecules of ATP. So when we did step one with the creatine phosphate, it was 1 molecule of ATP per 1 molecule of creatine phosphate. Here we're getting, when glucose is broken down, we're getting 2 molecules of ATP. So here it is in chemical form. It's happening, this is where it happens in the cytoplasm. So again, remember that's that jelly-like background substance inside a cell. And this is it's kind of, it's a molecule that's important for changing things, accepting different ionic bonds within a chemical reaction. And it's part of the DNA sequence made up. So it's always there within all cells because all cells come from, have a genetic makeup of DNA. But here we go. So we have our two, so this is our glycogen, okay? And then we have our ADP, and then we get the 2 bits of the pyruvic acid, and that is what's going to yield our 2 ATP, right? So we have that changeover from here to there. Good, so that's the chemical reaction. Anaerobic pathway, this is still number 2. So what about lactic acid formation? So this is what happens. The pyruvic acid, after the chemical reaction happens, enters the mitochondria. There's an aerobic respiration phase within the mitochondria. However, in high intensity activity, the oxygen is not available there, right? It's already, it's not that it's being used, it's that it's because of the high intensity, the blood flow is decreased to that area momentarily, right? The blood flows out and away from the cell, and then it's not able to deliver oxygen in those moments. So that's why this anaerobic pathway is important, because it doesn't require oxygen. So, so without that, what happens is the pyruvic acid is converted to lactic acid. All right. So if there was oxygen available, that would be different. But because it's not, then it gets converted to lactic acid. So before I talk about lactic acid, I'm gonna. Where's the lactic acid myth? Huh? Oh, it's right here. Okay. I don't know how that happened. But the lactic acid myth is that we get muscle soreness due to lactic acid. So we're just not going to say that anymore. Like when we talk about, my thighs from that workout, all the lactic acid is in there causing that burning sensation. Not the case, right? So what actually happens is within 45 minutes or so, the lactic acid from this process is diffused into the bloodstream. It's used as fuel. So first it's used as fuel by the liver, the kidneys, and the heart. And then basically whatever is left is converted back into pyruvic acid or glucose by the liver. So it's going to reformulate back into pyruvic acid and be available for more energy generation. It is not going to cause soreness in the muscles. So anaerobic, this is without oxygen, yields 5% as much as aerobic respiration, but produces ATP 2.5 times faster. So this little note on our number 2 pathway, anaerobic pathway, is that we don't get a lot of energy, but we get it a lot faster, 2.5 times faster. So a tiny little bit of energy, but very, very fast. So a little digression here, because what does cause the muscle soreness is micro tears in the muscle fiber tissue leads to inflammation. So when there's a little bit of tearing, there's a little bit of cellular repair, cells moving, fluid moving, inflammation. That's what makes the tight soreness feeling. DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, is common after doing something like high intensity interval training, but it can also be it can also not technically be like it can just be more work than your muscles are normally doing. But most common, it's with HIIT. All right, so back on to our pathways for regenerating during muscle activity. So this is our anaerobic pathway, right? So we get the glucose in the cytosol, that's the location of it happening, is going to break down and produce pyruvic acid as well as the ATP net gain generation, right, from our chemical equation. Gets pyruvic acid becomes a byproduct becomes lactic acid. The lactic acid gets released into the blood. Then, and there's no presence of oxygen here. That's why it happens. And then from the bloodstream, it reconverts back into pyruvic acid. This is nice. It breaks down what you get here. You get 2 ATP molecules per glucose, and lactic acid is another byproduct of that. This is about 40 seconds. So back to number 1, ATP per CP, creatine phosphate, 1 molecule of ATP, about 10 to 15 seconds, right? This is with the ATP reserve, so the ones that we already had, but in addition to that. Number 2, an anaerobic respiration, not much ATP, 2 per glucose molecule, but it's very fast, right? 2.5 times as fast. Oxygen is not required, and it gives us a more sustained energy for another 30 to 40 seconds. So number 3, energy for contraction by aerobic respiration. Takes the longest amount of time, but gives us the most energy. So chemical reactions occur within the mitochondria, and it's a series of them. The more chemical reactions that have to take place, the more time it's going to take, right? It's not in the cytosol, which is where we saw pathway 2. The anaerobic was happening in the cytosol. And here, of course, the difference also is that it requires oxygen. So there's going to be more than, it does break down glucose, and you do get about 32 molecules of ATP can be produced. So we have glucose, liver, we have glycogen actually stored in our muscle fibers, and then we have bloodborne glucose and free fatty acids. Okay, so this is all the places where we have glucose and glycogen. Free fatty acids is going to be where we are going to get the big bulk of our energy. A note on glycogen, just people tend to, they like do these low carbohydrate diets. And so there's glycogen stored in the liver, but there's also glycogen in the muscle fibers. And what it's just reminding me of is the fact that you can lose up to 8 pounds of glycogen first. So it's when you stop eating carbohydrates, your body can no longer get the energy from that food source. So it has to start breaking down glycogen. So before we actually shrink our adipose tissue, if our main goal is to lose weight to decrease adipose tissue, we're actually going to draw on the glycogen reserves in a restrictive diet in that way, which is a lot different than putting out more energy than taking in fewer calories. If you want to lose weight to decrease adipose tissue, you put out more energy and you take in fewer energy molecules, fewer calories. If you take away just the carbohydrate chains, then your body has to get the glycogen from somewhere else. You actually lose all this weight from the glycogen, not from the fat tissue. Anyway, but back to aerobic respiration, free fatty acids are going to be where we get most of it. Main fuel after 30 minutes of exercise. So if we're burning fatty acids, we're getting a lot of energy, and because we can keep using the first 2 pathways, right? So those can keep regenerating ATP, right? But after 30 minutes, we're actually going to shift to just using the fatty acids, because now the body's had time to already start the conversions of the fatty acids and produce a lot of energy from it. So once that pathway gets revved up and utilized, we can let go of utilizing the other 2 pathways. They're not needed anymore because we have it coming from the aerobic respiration. So these both are aerobic respiration equations, right? And this is just my interpretation of it. So glucose plus oxygen yields our energy, and there's byproducts here, right, of the carbon dioxide in the water. But the fatty acid here, is just I'm illustrating with oxygen, produces a lot more ATP. And I said all this. So glucose sparing, aerobic respiration is glucose sparing. It wants to keep the glucose on hand for other muscle contraction reserves and other processes like brain activity, etc. So it's gonna spare these and opt for the fats and the longer duration. Okay. Let me just see what we got. Okay, good. So last slide here is just showing glucose breaking down. Right, this is going to happen in the mitochondria. We have the pyruvic acid. Fatty acids is going to be where the bulk of our ATP comes from, although all of these are going to be utilized, converted, and then producing a net gain of about 32 molecules of ATP per 1 molecule of glucose, again, or with fatty acid. Okay, let's pause here.